Hey guys, welcome to week 7 of Talking with God. Week 7 of part 2 Principles of Hearing God. We're almost done. We only have 2 weeks left. So let's finish strong. Let's get started. So this week we have the last two of our 8 C's, our final 2 C's. We are in the E of examine, and we're examining to make sure that what we're hearing is truly God. And we've had 8 C's, 8 different tests, and the last two are circumstances and cover. Circumstances and cover. So let's review some salient points and look at a few scriptures. So for circumstances, what did we learn this week? What did we learn? Well, we learned to wait and watch your circumstances to see how they are aligning. Wait and watch to see how they're aligning with what you think God is telling you to do. You need to live with a God consciousness and spiritual eyes. You need to realize that God is God. He's in control. He's in the midst of circumstances, and pay attention to them. Then you can analyze how what's happening around you might be God speaking to you or not. But we don't rely on circumstances alone. Remember that we don't take any of these 8 C's in isolation. They need to work together to create a harmony and a unity for God's will. You can ask yourself, are doors opening or closing to your decision? Look for openings or hindrances to the path you are thinking that God is telling you to take. Look for openings or hindrances. Another way that God can speak is, are you seeing or hearing a persistent and repetitive message from others, from Scripture, and your overall surroundings that support or speak against what you think God is telling you to do? You need to pay attention, watch, and wait, because God often works supernaturally natural amid everyday life by orchestrating events. There was a time in Cary, North Carolina, when I was at Calvary Chapel, very young in my Christian life, when there was a new believers class. And a friend came up to me and said, hey, there's a new believers class. You should probably take it. Well, I didn't sign up for it. I didn't want to. I didn't think I needed to. I figured I could learn what I needed to learn at my own pace and on my own. So I ignored it. And then the pastor said to me, hey, Greg, I know you're a new believer. I think you should take this class that's coming up. I didn't sign up. And then my wife told me, hey, let's take this new believers class together. And I still ignored it. And finally, my neighbor came over and said, hey, that class starts tonight. I'm going to go too. It's always good to review. I think you should go. And finally, the Lord got through my thick head that I needed to do the class. It was probably pride, lack of knowledge, whatever it was. But he was using a repetitive message, people telling me the same thing over and over again to reach me and tell me what his will was. So I went to the class, and then I was amazed and glad that I did. In certain situations, ask yourself, is this lining up with God, with what God is already doing in my life? The Lord works slowly and methodically to build and prepare us for what he wants to do with us in the future. So God is often, working in conjunction, in parallel, in consistency with what he's already doing in your life. You have to be very careful of sudden and dramatic changes that occur and making those changes. It doesn't mean that that's not possible, but you need to be careful. Now, let's talk a little bit about open and closed doors. Here's an open door, and here's a closed door. A few things we need to understand is that all open doors do not equal yes. Not every open door is a yes, go through it. Not all closed doors are no. Open doors can be the world, the devil. It could be just chance, who knows? But not every open door that's open means you're supposed to go through it. So you need to be very careful. Not every closed door is a no. Closed doors can actually be a diversion by God to a different path or a delay. And we're going to see an awesome example of that in a little bit. When you're thinking about these doors, pray and use the other 8 C's before entering or moving on. If you're going to go through a door or skip a door that's closed, pray about it. Use the other 8 C's. And sometimes you need to hang out around the door. You need to knock on the door. You need to hang out around that open door. You need to pray about it. You need to kind of peek in, see, God, should I go through this or not? Or God, is this really closed? Or what do you want me to do? And ask God to do the opening and the closing. Let's look at a few scriptures. There's some really cool ones this week. The first one is Jeremiah 32, verses 6 to 10. I'm not going to read the entire passage. You studied it, but basically Jeremiah gets a word from the Lord. He's told to buy a field, that someone will come and ask him to buy this field. That happens. And then look what he says in verse 8. Then I knew that this was the word of the Lord. Then I knew that this was the word of the Lord. So Jeremiah wasn't exactly certain when he heard it. Look in verse 6. It says, the word of the Lord came to me saying. And so he heard that, but then when it was actually fulfilled, then he's like, okay, I really did hear God, right? So there was a little doubt. And remember, he's a prophet. That's okay. It's okay to have doubt. If the prophets did, then you're allowed to also. But look what Jeremiah didn't do. He waited until he had evidence of what the Lord told him to do. He didn't go on what he thought the word was alone. He waited to see if circumstances would align with what God had told him. And so that's the important thing. He didn't jump the gun. He waited. So wait, go slowly, and be careful. And then we have this very, very famous verse from Esther, Esther 4:14, which deals with this exact scenario of God's circumstances. And the technical term for this is providence. Providence is God being supernaturally natural, working in the midst of everyday life and circumstances to orchestrate events to accomplish his will. Look what verse 14 says here. This is Mordecai speaking to Esther. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will surely perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So what Mordecai was saying was, remember in Esther, there's the evil person Haman who's trying to get the Jews eradicated. He had a edict issued from the king so that the Jews would be eliminated and exterminated, basically genocide. And Mordecai realized that what are the chances of a Jewish queen in the Persian Empire when an edict was given to exterminate the Jews? I mean, what are the chances that it's obvious that it was God and he's telling her that she needed to act? But what we learn here too is that God gives us opportunity, but he does not need us, does he? He doesn't need us. It's an opportunity. It's a blessing to be used, but God will accomplish it with or without us. He can use someone else because he says that deliverance will arise from another place. So just remember that. But this is a great story showing God's providence and circumstances, and it was obvious. And Esther went on to do it. We had a couple incidences lately. Let me tell you two very quick stories. We were on a cruise this summer in Italy, but before the cruise, we stayed in a hotel about an hour and a half north of the port of Rome. And while we were at the hotel for 3 days before, Ruth, my wife, was out in the water swimming. She met a couple of 4 people, and they began to talk and became friends. And then I came out. We became friends, and we're talking. And they just so happened to be going on the exact same cruise that we were going on. Now, the Lord often uses us on vacations to meet people, befriend them, and end up being a witness to them. So we thought this might be what was happening, but then for the next 3 days, we kept running into them and talking with them and becoming closer. And then when we got on the ship, they immediately invited us to hang out with them. And we spent a lot of the time with them and their friends. There were actually 8 of them. And after the ship, after the cruise was over, we gave them my book, and we kept in contact. And we actually just went to visit them last weekend, and we had an amazing time of witnessing and talking about the Lord. And they were both being drawn. They both had questions, and the man had actually just started reading through the entire Bible on his own. So that was very cool. And then there was a time when I was on a plane and a man sat next to me. And he was very angry and agitated when he sat down, and I was reading my Bible. And he turned and said to me after a few minutes, "Why are you reading your Bible? Why are you reading that book?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Christian, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Well, I just don't understand why you're reading that." And he was very frustrated. And then he began to tell me that his wife and his daughter were Christians, and that he didn't want to go to church, and they're trying to drag him to church, and he's not going to church. And I said, "Well, fine, don't go to church." I said, "But you need to know if God's real. Ask him if he's real, and to reveal himself." I'm like, forget about church. It's about you and God and your relationship. Church will come later. And so the man left and the plane, and then he contacted me about 4 months later. He told me he had been saved, that he was very grateful, that he knew that I was put there next to him for a reason. And in fact, he was supposed to be in first class. He was a business traveler or something. He got bumped back into coach. That's why he was mad. But he said even while he was there talking with me, he realized that God had put him next to me, and he was fighting it because he realized that it wasn't any coincidence. And for me, when I'm sitting there, I'm seeing God at work, and I'm realizing, okay, this is obviously God. I can go ahead and just start talking to this man. Didn't even need to pray about that when it was obvious, because the word tells us to be a witness. So 2 quick little stories there. Now let's move on and look at one of my favorite examples of God's providence and circumstances, and how open and closed doors can all work together to accomplish God's will. We're going to read this together. This is from Acts 16, verses 6 through 12. This is Paul's second missionary journey, and they're describing it about the first third of the way into the journey. It reads, "Now when they had gone through Phrygia and the region of Galatia, they were forbidden by the Holy Spirit to preach the word in Asia. After they had come to Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit did not permit them. So passing by Mysia, they came down to Troas, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia stood and pleaded with him, saying, 'Come over to Macedonia and help us.' Now after he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go to Macedonia, concluding that the Lord had called us to preach the gospel to them. Therefore, sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace, and the next day came to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city of the part of Macedonia, a colony, and we were staying in that city for some days." Now, what we see happening here, let me highlight some verses for you, is that we see 2 closed doors, right? We see in verse 6, they were forbidden to preach the word in Asia. And then they tried to go in Bithynia, and they couldn't go there either. And so they came to Troas. So let's look at a map. Sometimes it's good to bring out your atlas and kind of look visually at what's happening. It makes it a little bit clearer. So here's a map of Paul's second missionary journey. And they started down here in Antioch. That was kind of the command central headquarters for these missionary journeys. And we have Israel below. We have above us is basically Turkey, and then across the Aegean Sea, that's the area of Greece. And we see over there to the left in red the area of Asia, which is modern-day Turkey. That's what he was talking about. So what happened was, in the story, if you recall what I just read, they came to Phrygia. They tried to go into Asia, but they got a closed door. Okay, so God closed the door there for them to go keep heading west into Asia. Now, what did that do? That pushed them north. And look what's north of there, right? You see at Bithynia, where they were also blocked from going. So let's look at this now in a little bit more of a blown up view. They were in Phrygia. They got a closed door. They were pushed north, but instead of going into Bithynia, they were blocked. And what did that do? That pushed them west. So you can see that God was using the closed doors not to say no, but to direct them in the right direction. He was directing their path. He didn't want them to go east. He wanted them to go north, and then he didn't want them to keep going north. He needed to turn them to the west. because he wanted them at Troas. So they end up in Troas. And we're going to see exactly why. This is very cool. So look what happens when they went to Troas. We just read it. A vision appeared to them in the night, and a man basically came and said, come to Macedonia. So God wanted the missionary team of Paul in Troas because they were going to get a vision there, which would lead them to their next place, which ended up being Philippi, which is obviously an important city. But there's more here, and you studied this in your homework. I hope you figured it out. But something else very interesting, very important happened here is that Luke joined Paul here. Well, how do we know? Well, look how the pronouns change because Luke wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts. We know that. That's not in question. And look at the pronouns. They, Troas, and after Troas, we, us, we. So Luke had joined the story, and once he was actually part of the story, he changed the pronouns to we because he was actually there. So to summarize this awesome example from Acts 16, we had a closed door in Asia. We had a closed door to Bithynia. But then we had an open door and a redirection to Troas through that. And when they were in Troas, they had a vision to go to Macedonia. They end up in Philippi. And they pick up Luke. Look, guys, Philippi and Luke are key in the New Testament because Philippi is a place that Paul spent a lot of time. We have the book of Philippians, and Luke wrote 2 books of the New Testament, and he's critical. So you can see how these closed and open doors and redirection of paths all worked. They were a diversion to the right open door and the perfect timing of God. Amazing. So very cool. Great example. Go back and study it if you need to. Now let's move on to cover, which is prayer. What did we learn? We learned to always cover what you are hearing in prayer. Talk to God. Now I have a typo there because I was in a hurry. I had to cover for Pastor Chad last night. So it actually reads, always cover what you are hearing in prayer. Always. No, I'm kidding. It should say always. So you can't ever go wrong by talking to God. Right? Pray about what you are hearing and even pray against it. Lord, I'm hearing blank from you. Is this correct, Lord? If I am wrong, please show me and close the door. Covering what you are hearing in prayer is specifically discussing your situation with God himself to make sure you're on the right path. And that's always a good thing to do. And another good thing to do is pray for and against what you think you are hearing and make the decision and let God make the decision for you. Be patient. I have something going on in my own life, and it's been rather tumultuous, so pray for me. But I'm talking to God about it. I'm expressing. I'm using the 8 C's. I'm bringing it up before him. Lord, what's going on? And Lord, I think I'm hearing this. And make sure, Lord, I'm not thinking of this wrong. And just hashing it and rehashing it with him, and then listening and getting in the word. So you always want to cover what you think you're hearing in prayer. You pray about your prayers. You pray about what you think you're hearing, okay? Can't go wrong with that. Let's look at a quick story from 1 Samuel. This is a great little example. In this story, David is about to go to war, and he's going to ask the Lord what to do. Verse 1 of 1 Samuel 23, Then they told David, saying, Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. This is a good example of covering what you're think you're hearing from God in prayer. Let's look at it very quickly. So we have David. What did he do? He asked the Lord, should I go? A very simple, direct question. Should I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord gives him back a simple answer, go. But what happened is that David's men then questioned and says, hey, wait a minute, we're afraid. And we're not sure about this. So then what did David do? He inquired of the Lord once again. He confirmed and asked um, the Lord to confirm what he had heard. Now, what didn't he do? How could he have handled this wrongly? He could have um, just said, hey guys, I heard from the Lord and we're going. Don't question me. I'm the king. I know what I heard and God told me to go, so we're going. But he didn't do that, did he? He asked the Lord again. He confirmed what he was hearing. And notice how the Lord responded. Did the Lord rebuke him? Did the Lord say, well, I told you the first time, aren't you listening to me? Or do I need to say everything twice? Of course not. God not only said go, but he actually gave him a little information. It says, go down, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. He gave them a little bit more information. And so just to summarize, David asked and got a yes. His men had concerns. He asked again to double check and confirm, a smart thing to do. And think about it, he was going to war. When the stakes are high, when the potential consequences of your decision can have greater impact, if you're wrong, then you certainly want to double check and confirm and make sure, right? Because he was going to war. And the other thing here that I like is it was just plain and simple requests. Lord, should I do this? And the Lord answered him simply. I don't know how. That will be the topic of part 4 of this study. How did God tell David no? It looks like he just spoke it to him. It says, and the Lord said to David. The word means what it says and says what it means. But it was just a plain and simple dialogue, right? We've learned that prayer is a dialogue, not a monologue. And just very briefly, we're almost done. When to check and when not to check by prayer. Now, we've said it's never wrong to check, but there are some instances when maybe you don't have to. How about yes? When should you pray? Well, if you're getting married, about the person you're married to, a job, buying a home, business deals, moving, divorce, and marriage problems. There was a time when I was about to buy into a beach house in Wilmington. This is before I moved here, when I lived in Cary, and I was a new Christian. I went to a party, and I was telling one of the guys I was talking to, an older gentleman, about how I was excited. I'm finally getting to buy into a beach house. I was going to get a quarter share, and I've always wanted one, and I was so happy and excited. And he says, well, have you asked the Lord about it? And I said, no. And he said, why? And I said, well, why would I? And he says, why wouldn't you? And I said, well, why would I? And he says, well, why wouldn't you? So this went back and forth because I simply just, as a new Christian, didn't understand that God was in the midst of these circumstances. I couldn't comprehend it. I said, are you telling me that God's interested in whether I buy into a beach house or not? And he said, yes. And I said, well, how is he going to tell me? How is he going to guide me? How am I going to know? And he says, don't worry. He says, just ask him and ask him to guide you. And one way or another, you will know. So I'm like, okay, well, I thought it sounded a little crazy, but I went home and in faith, without sarcasm, said, Lord, I'm supposed to buy into this beach house. Please let me know whether I should do it or not. And sure enough, that night, I was woken up out of a sleep. I kid you not. This hasn't happened to me but a few times in my Christian life. And I heard in my mind as clear as day, do not buy into the beach house. And I want you to take the money that you were using for that and pay off your debt. And so I was like, whoa, but I was shaken. I woke up my wife, and she said, be quiet, I'm sleeping. So I told her in the morning, and she says, you can't do that. We're supposed to buy into this house. It's at the very last second. The deal is going to be closing. They're going to be angry with you. We could lose friends. And I said, look, I know what I heard, and I'm doing it. I'm going to do what God says, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. Because I understood at least a little bit that God understood where I was, and that if I obeyed, he would, probably work this out for me. So I did, and I called the man, and I didn't tell him that God told me because I knew he thought I was crazy. But I said, I'm taking my money, I'm paying off the debt. I think that's a better move. And here's the wisdom of God. Watch this. He said, you know what? I understand that. I'm a no debt guy. He was very wealthy. And he said, I appreciate that. He's like, no problem. He's like, you can still have a share in the beach house. You can just pay me rent. He told me what the rent would be for my quarter share. It was less than my expenses would be as an owner by a significant amount. So I still got the beach house at a less cost. And what I didn't know was I didn't need the beach house because I was going to be moving to Wilmington about 2 years later. So there you have it, the wisdom of God. Obey what he says and check everything by prayer. How about some instances when no, you don't need to check by prayer? And I have a question mark there because, again, it's never wrong to check things. But there are some times when you probably can just go, like witnessing, helping someone with some acute needs like accidents or medical things. I mean, if you see someone on the side of the road who's hurt, you don't need to, and bleeding or something, you don't need to ask God whether you should help them. You just help them. Or obvious situations like Esther, the man on the plane where I was witnessing that was obvious, right? Or anyone, just people who are questioning about Jesus, asking questions. You can just go ahead and go with those, I think. So let's quickly summarize. Remember, we've said that everything is about the relationship. And now we're going to put all 8 C's on the relationship because everything goes back to that. Very quickly, you have this handout. We have consistency. We have knowing the character of God and comparing to the person and teachings of Jesus Christ. That occurs here. And we have the crop, what flows out of the relationship, whatever vine you're abiding in. You're going to check for the fruit, right? You're going to look for love instead of rotten or plastic fruit. You are going to have peace if you have the relationship. You can see that the bracket spans all the aspects of a relationship, and the person who has that relationship going will have the peace of God. And you're going to check your heart. You're going to check your heart and examine it, and you're going to let the peace of God, remember, umpire. And then you're going to look for a balance of faith and wisdom, right? You're going to check for a balance of faith and wisdom in what you're hearing. And we also learned that you're going to get counsel. You get counsel from others and obviously counsel from the Word. You're getting counsel from God when you look to the Word. Cover, that's this week, right? That's praying. And lastly, on the bottom, we have throughout all the relationship, we can analyze things through our circumstances, open and closed doors. What is God already orchestrating? And then let's do a review of the first 7 E's. The first 7 E's. We have 2 left. That will be our final week. But again, they all fit in with the relationship in different aspects. And the important thing is that if you have the components of the relationship, all of them, remember, not just over to the left with a little Bible reading and a little prayer. No, we need all of it to be healthy. We need to be grown up, lined up, freed up, and filled up. Those are the components right there in green of the Word of God, prayer, surrender and repentance and worship. We need all those components. If you have that, everything's going to start to fall into place naturally because these things will be happening naturally because they come from the relationship, right? We have expect, expressing, expelling, getting rid of things, eliminating and examining, right? We have examining the Word. That's the 8 C's. Eliminate was fasting. Fasting encompasses pretty much all the parts of the relationship. We have ears, we're listening. We have engage, we're engaging the Word. So 1 week left, hang in there, finish the study strong, and have a great day.